Get back to work, the fiancé shouted at the pregnant maid. Seconds later, the billionaire discovered her cruel secret. Nobody in that mansion knew what she was hiding under her uniform that morning, and by the time they found out, it was already too late to undo what had been done to her. She smiled when told to lift what she was forbidden to lift. She stayed silent when she was screamed at in a hallway meant for laughter, not fear. She kept working because she had no other choice, because a paycheck meant more to her than her safety did that day. But somewhere in that house, a door was about to open at the worst possible moment. Hey friends, welcome back to the channel. If you're here, it's because you love stories that stay with you long after the video ends. Where are you watching from tonight? Drop your city below, we'd love to know. Today's story is one of the most emotional and unforgettable ones we've ever told, so if you're ready, let's get into it. The sun hadn't even fully risen over Savannah when Naomi Carter was already on her feet. She moved slowly through the kitchen of the Bishop estate, one hand resting on the small of her back, the other steadying a tray of coffee cups she had no business carrying at 8 months pregnant. But this was her routine, and routines were the only thing that made a woman feel normal when her body no longer felt like her own. The Bishop estate sat on 4 quiet acres just outside the city, a pale stone mansion with wide porches and old oak trees that had stood there longer than anyone could remember. Naomi had worked inside those walls for 6 years, long before anyone had ever heard the name Bianca Sterling, long before diamond rings and wedding magazines started showing up on the coffee table in the east sitting room. She remembered the first day she walked through the service entrance, nervous and unsure, holding her son Elijah's hand because she hadn't been able to find a sitter. Nathaniel Bishop, the man who owned all of it, hadn't said a word about the boy sitting quietly in the corner of the kitchen with a coloring book. He'd simply told her, "Family comes first here. Always will." She never forgot that. 6 years later, Elijah was 8 years old, growing tall and curious, and Naomi was carrying her second child, a daughter she and her husband Marcus had already decided to name Grace. Marcus worked long hours on construction sites across the county, coming home with his hands rough and his back sore, and between the two of them, they had built something small but steady, a rented house 2 streets from Elijah's school, a used car that mostly behaved, and a dream neither of them said out loud too often, in case saying it broke the spell. A home of their own one day, with a yard big enough for their children to run in. At night, after Elijah was asleep, Naomi and Marcus would sit on the back steps of their little rented house and talk about the future in soft voices, careful not to jinx it. Marcus wanted a house with a real garage, somewhere he could finally fix up the old truck he loved more than he probably should. Naomi wanted a yard with enough room for a swing set, and maybe someday a dog for the kids to grow up with. Neither of them said it, but they both knew how much of that future depended on 2 things: Marcus's overtime, and Naomi keeping her job at the Bishop estate through this pregnancy and beyond. Naomi loved her job. She loved the quiet hours before the household woke, the smell of coffee brewing, the way morning light came through the tall kitchen windows and turned the marble counters gold. She loved Mr. Bishop, too, in the way you love a good employer who treats you like a person and not a piece of furniture. He asked about Elijah's report cards. He remembered Marcus's name. When Naomi told him she was pregnant again, he'd smiled, genuinely smiled, and told her to take whatever time she needed once the baby came. But her doctor's warning sat heavy in the back of her mind every single day. Dr. Reyes had been clear at her last appointment. Her blood pressure was running high, dangerously high for someone this far along, and she was not to lift anything heavy, not to stand for long stretches, not to push her body past its limits. "Rest when you can," Dr. Reyes had said, looking at her over the top of her glasses. "This isn't a suggestion, Naomi. This is for your safety and your daughter's." Naomi had nodded and said she understood. She hadn't told Mr. Bishop the full details, only that she needed to take things a little easier these last few weeks. He'd agreed without hesitation. "Whatever you need," he'd said. "Walter can handle the heavier things until you're back on your feet." Walter Higgins, the estate's longtime butler, was the closest thing Naomi had to family inside those walls. He'd been with the Bishops for over 20 years, back when Nathaniel's own parents still ran the household, and he had a way of noticing things before anyone said a word about them. That morning, as Naomi set the tray down a little too carefully, wincing as she straightened, Walter appeared beside her without a sound and lifted the tray from her hands. "You shouldn't be carrying that," he said quietly. "I'm fine, Walter. You're 8 months pregnant and your doctor told you to rest. Those two things don't belong in the same sentence as fine." His eyes were kind but firm. "Let me take it. Go sit down for 10 minutes before she comes downstairs." Naomi didn't have to ask who she was. Bianca Sterling had moved into the estate 3 months earlier, not long after Nathaniel proposed during a trip to the coast. She was 29, striking in the practiced way of someone who had spent years being photographed, and she carried herself through the house like she was already its owner. At first, Naomi had tried to give her the benefit of the doubt. New fiancés were often nervous, uncertain how to fit into a household that already had its own rhythm. But the benefit of the doubt had worn thin quickly. Bianca rarely spoke to Naomi directly unless she wanted something done, and even then she rarely said please. She had opinions about everything: the placement of furniture, the folding of linens, the exact temperature of her tea, and she expected those opinions carried out immediately, regardless of who was asked to carry them out or what condition they were in. Just yesterday, Bianca had asked Naomi to rearrange the entire sitting room for a magazine photographer who was coming to shoot engagement photos. Not asked really. Told. "I need this done before noon," she'd said, not even looking up from her phone, gesturing vaguely at a room full of furniture that needed moving. Naomi had done her best with what she could manage on her own, sliding lighter pieces, leaving the heavier ones for Walter, but Bianca had come back an hour later, frowning at the unfinished room. "This isn't what I asked for," she'd snapped. "Do I need to explain myself twice?" Naomi had wanted to explain. About her back, about the baby, about doctor's orders that weren't hers to ignore, but something in Bianca's expression told her the explanation wouldn't matter. So she'd said nothing, and finished the job slower than Bianca wanted, and absorbed the irritation that followed her out of the room like a bad smell. Now, sitting for a rare quiet moment at the small kitchen table while Walter finished setting up the coffee service, Naomi rested a hand on her belly and felt grace shift inside her, a small, stubborn kick against her palm. "Won't be much longer now," Walter said gently, glancing at her from across the kitchen. "You just need to get through these last few weeks." "I know," Naomi said, managing a tired smile. "I just need this job a little while longer." "We need it." Walter's face softened, but there was something else there too, a flicker of worry he tried to hide by turning back to the coffee tray. He had seen households change before. He had seen kindness get pushed out by people who didn't understand what kindness cost, or why it mattered. He hoped, for Naomi's sake, that this house wasn't about to become one of those places. Upstairs, a door opened and closed. Footsteps started down the hallway, unhurried, confident, the click of expensive heels against hardwood. Naomi stood up slowly, smoothing her apron over her belly, and got ready to start the day. If you had a job that meant everything to your family's future, how far would you push yourself to keep it, even when your body was telling you to stop? By the second week of that month, the house didn't feel like the same house Naomi had loved for 6 years. Bianca's demands had grown sharper, more frequent, and somehow always seemed to land exactly when Naomi was most exhausted. It started small, an extra load of laundry here, a rearranged closet there, but small things had a way of stacking up into something heavier than any of them looked on their own. The wedding was 11 weeks away, and Bianca had thrown herself into planning it with an intensity that bordered on obsession. Every surface of the house seemed to be covered in swatches of fabric, seating charts, and printed photos of floral arrangements. She wanted the estate to look a certain way for the engagement gala coming up in a few weeks, A way that apparently required constant, exhausting labor from a woman who wasn't supposed to be lifting a laundry basket, let alone hauling furniture across marble floors. "I need the ballroom cleared by Thursday," Bianca announced one afternoon, standing in the doorway with a tablet in her hand, scrolling through a mood board like she was reading off a grocery list. "All of it. I want it empty for the florist to walk through." "The ballroom hasn't been touched in years," Naomi said carefully. "That's a lot of furniture, Miss Sterling. I can ask Walter to." "I'm not asking Walter. I'm asking you." Bianca finally looked up from her tablet, her eyes cool and unreadable. "This is your job, isn't it? Or has that changed since I got here?" Naomi swallowed the response that rose in her throat and simply nodded. There was no winning an argument with Bianca, not one that ended well for anyone below her on the household's invisible ladder. So Naomi did what she always did. She found a way to get the job partly done herself, moving what she safely could, leaving notes for Walter to finish the rest when Bianca wasn't watching, and hoping nobody noticed the difference. What made it harder was how different Bianca became the moment Nathaniel walked through the door. The sharp edges softened instantly, like a switch had been flipped. She would drape herself against his arm, laugh at things that weren't funny, ask about his day in a voice dripping with sweetness that never once made its way downstairs to the kitchen. Naomi had seen it a dozen times now, the transformation so smooth it almost impressed her, if it hadn't been so exhausting to witness. "She's a completely different person around him," Naomi confided to Walter one evening, folding towels slower than usual, her lower back aching in a way that worried her more than she let on. "It's like watching two different women live in the same house." Walter's jaw tightened. "I've worked in this house a long time, Naomi. I've seen people come and go. Some of them were kind straight through. Some of them wore kindness like a coat they only put on for company." He set down the silver he was polishing. "I don't like where this one is heading." He wasn't the only one who noticed. Rosa, one of the housekeepers, had started keeping her distance from Bianca whenever possible, finding reasons to be in another wing of the house. The gardener, Theo, had mentioned more than once that Bianca had snapped at him over nothing, then acted wounded when he apologized, as if he'd been the one out of line. Slowly, without anyone saying it directly, the staff had begun operating on an unspoken rule. Stay out of her path when you can, and brace yourself when you can't. Part of what made it sting worse for Naomi was the history underneath it all. Nathaniel had grown up nothing like the man his wealth suggested. His father had built the family's fortune from almost nothing, working construction before moving into real estate, and Nathaniel never let anyone forget where he came from. He treated the household staff less like employees and more like an extension of the family that raised him. Naomi had always believed that loyalty ran both directions in this house, and for 6 years it had. But Bianca seemed threatened by exactly that kind of closeness. Naomi noticed how her jaw tightened whenever Nathaniel asked about Elijah, how her smile turned brittle whenever he mentioned how long Naomi had worked for the family, how much he trusted her. It was a small, cold thing Naomi couldn't quite name, but she felt it every time, like Bianca resented anyone who had a claim to Nathaniel's affection that didn't come from a ring. One evening, Naomi overheard part of a conversation she wasn't meant to hear. She'd gone to bring down fresh linens and paused outside the study, where Bianca's voice carried sharp and clipped through the half-open door. "I don't understand why you let them treat this house like it's theirs too," Bianca was saying. "The staff, I mean. Especially her." "Naomi's been with this family longer than you've known me," Nathaniel replied, an edge of warning in his usually easy voice. "She's not just staff to me, Bianca. She's practically family." There was a pause, long enough that Naomi almost turned to leave. "Of course," Bianca said finally, her voice smoothing back into silk. "I just want everything perfect before the wedding. That's all." Naomi backed away quietly and finished her rounds with her heart pounding harder than the short walk should have caused. Something about the exchange settled uneasily in her stomach, a feeling she couldn't shake for the rest of the night. The following morning, Dr. Reyes's office called to move up Naomi's appointment, citing her blood pressure numbers from the previous visit. Naomi asked for the afternoon off, expecting no trouble. Mr. Bishop had always been generous about doctor's appointments. But it was Bianca who answered when Naomi asked, standing in the hallway with her arms crossed. "We have caterers coming today," Bianca said flatly. "I really need all hands here." "It's for the baby," Naomi said quietly. "My blood pressure." "You'll survive one afternoon," Bianca said, already walking away. "We'll talk about a real day off after the gala." Naomi stood there for a long moment, one hand pressed to her belly, feeling something inside her. Not just fear, but a slow, sinking realization that the ground beneath her feet in this house was no longer as solid as it used to be. She called Marcus on her break, sitting alone in the pantry with the door half closed, keeping her voice low. "Just tell Mr. Bishop," Marcus said, his voice tight with worry through the phone. "He'd want to know if she's pushing you like this. You said yourself he cares about you and Elijah." "I don't want to cause trouble right before their wedding," Naomi whispered. "And what if he takes her side? Then I've got nothing. No job, no income, and a baby coming in a few weeks. Naomi, your health matters more than—" "I know," she said quickly, cutting him off gently. "I know, Marcus. I just need to get through the gala. After that, things will slow down. It has to slow down." She didn't fully believe her own words, but saying them out loud made the day feel a little more survivable. When she hung up, she pressed both hands against her belly and breathed slowly until Grace's restless kicking settled, and then she went back to work, because that was what the day still required of her, whether her body agreed or not. Have you ever had to choose between speaking up for yourself and keeping the job your family depended on? The morning of the gala walkthrough, everything that had been building quietly for weeks finally broke open. Naomi had been on her feet since 5, helping direct the caterers and float staff into place while Bianca paced the ballroom barking instructions into her phone. By 10, Naomi's back had locked into a dull, steady ache that no amount of shifting her weight seemed to fix. Her ankles had swollen inside her shoes. Every so often, a tight pulling sensation would grip low across her belly and hold for a few seconds before releasing, and each time it happened, she paused, breathed through it and kept moving, because stopping wasn't something the day seemed to allow. She thought about calling Marcus again, just to hear his voice for 30 seconds between tasks, but there wasn't time. There was never time anymore. The house had turned into a machine that only ran forward, and Naomi had learned over the past weeks that stepping out of its rhythm, even for a moment, drew Bianca's attention in ways she'd rather avoid. So she kept moving, refilling water glasses, checking place settings against a list Bianca had printed and reprinted 3 times that week alone, each version demanding something slightly different than the last. Around 11, a delivery of folding chairs arrived at the wrong entrance, stacked in tall towers on the side patio instead of the ballroom. Bianca stormed out to find Naomi restocking linens nearby. "These need to be inside now," Bianca snapped, gesturing at the stacks. "The photographer is coming in an hour." "I'll get Theo to bring the dolly," Naomi said. "It'll just take a few minutes to." "I don't have a few minutes. I need this done now, not whenever Theo decides to show up." Bianca's voice had risen, sharp enough that a caterer nearby glanced over before quickly looking away. "Honestly, is it too much to ask you to do your job without an excuse every single time?" Something in Naomi's chest tightened, not from anger but from sheer exhaustion pressed right up against fear. She reached for the first stack of chairs anyway, because arguing had never worked before, and she didn't have the strength left that morning to try a new approach. She lifted, felt an immediate sharp pull low in her back, and set the chairs down again almost as fast as she'd picked them up, one hand flying to her belly. "I can't," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm sorry, I physically can't lift these. My doctor said." I don't care what your doctor said. Bianca's composure cracked completely now, her voice rising into something raw and ugly that the household had never heard directed so openly at anyone. I am so sick of hearing about your doctor, your baby, your excuses. Get back to work. She grabbed the nearest thing within reach, a field hockey stick left leaning against the patio wall from a charity match photo shoot the week before, and in one sharp, furious motion she swung it. The first hit landed across Naomi's forearm as she threw it up instinctively to protect her belly. Naomi cried out, stumbling back against the stacked chairs, and Bianca swung again, blind with a rage that had clearly been building far longer than that single morning, striking Naomi's shoulder as she curled protectively around herself, gasping, begging her to stop. That was the exact moment Nathaniel stepped through the side door. He'd come home 3 hours early, planning to surprise Bianca by joining the walkthrough, phone in his pocket still lit up with a text from Walter he hadn't had time to read yet. A message sent that morning, one of several Walter had tried to send over the past 2 weeks, warnings that had somehow never made it past Bianca's insistence on managing all the little details of the household's communications during wedding planning. Nathaniel had no idea, walking through that door, that he was about to understand exactly why those messages mattered. He froze in the doorway for what felt like a lifetime but was likely only a second or two, watching his fiancée raise a hockey stick over a pregnant woman curled on the ground, watching Naomi's arms thrown up over her belly, watching the sheer terror on her face. Bianca! His voice cracked through the patio like something physical. Bianca spun around, and in the space of a heartbeat, her entire expression rearranged itself, the fury draining away, replaced by wide, glassy eyes and a trembling lower lip, the stick dropping from her hand as if it had simply appeared there against her will. Nathaniel, thank God she came at me. I was just trying to defend myself. She grabbed my arm and I panicked. I didn't mean to. Stop. The word came out low and shaking. Stop talking. He was already moving past her, dropping to his knees beside Naomi, who was crying now, one hand pressed hard against her belly, the other clutching her throbbing arm. Naomi, look at me. Are you hurt? Is the baby? I don't know, Naomi managed between sobs. It hurts, Mr. Bishop, it hurts so bad. I'm calling an ambulance right now. You're gonna be okay. I've got you. He looked up, and when his eyes found Bianca again, there was nothing soft left in them. I saw you swing that thing twice, Bianca. I watched you hit a pregnant woman. Don't you dare stand there and tell me she came at you. You don't understand what she's been like, always making excuses, always. I understand perfectly. His voice was ice now, steady in a way that was somehow more frightening than shouting would have been. He pulled out his phone, and as he dialed for help, the screen lit up with Walter's unread messages from that morning, and the morning before that, and 3 separate mornings before that. Every one of them a warning about how Bianca had been treating Naomi, every one of them apparently never delivered to him until this exact second, because somehow, each time Walter tried, his messages had gone strangely, conveniently unanswered. Bianca saw the screen too, saw her own name in message after message she thought she had buried, and for the first time that morning, real panic flickered across her face. Not the performed kind, but something closer to the truth finally catching up to her. Nathaniel, whatever you think those messages say, I can explain. Not right now. He didn't even look at her. His full attention had returned to Naomi, whose breathing had gone shallow and fast, her hand still pressed against the tight curve of her belly. Somewhere behind him, staff had gathered in the doorway, Rosa with both hands over her mouth, Theo already on his own phone directing the ambulance toward the side gate. Walter knelt on Naomi's other side, gripping her hand, murmuring that help was almost there, that she needed to breathe slow and even, that she wasn't alone. The wail of a siren rose faintly in the distance, growing louder by the second, and still Naomi couldn't say for certain whether the ache tightening across her middle was fear, injury, or her body warning her that Grace wasn't willing to wait the remaining weeks she was supposed to. Nathaniel held her uninjured hand the entire time, his jaw tight. His eyes flicking once more toward Bianca standing frozen by the abandoned hockey stick. And in that look was a question none of them dared answer out loud yet. A question about what came next for all of them. What would you do if you were in Naomi's place? Tell us honestly in the comment. The hospital room was quiet except for the steady rhythm of a fetal heart monitor. A sound Naomi hadn't realized she'd been holding her breath to hear until it filled the room. Baby's heart rate looks strong, Dr. Reyes said, studying the monitor with a careful eye before turning back to Naomi. Your blood pressure spiked pretty significantly with the stress and the injury, which is exactly what we were trying to avoid these last few weeks. We're going to keep you overnight to be safe, but right now, both of you are stable. Naomi let out a breath that shook on its way out, relief and exhaustion tangled together so tightly she couldn't separate one from the other. Her forearm was wrapped from where the first blow had landed, deep bruising already blooming purple beneath the bandage, and her shoulder ached with every small movement. But Grace's heartbeat kept going steady on the monitor, and for now, that was the only thing Naomi let herself focus on. Nathaniel hadn't left the hallway outside her room since they'd arrived. Marcus had rushed straight from his job site, still in his work boots, and the two men had exchanged a brief, wordless understanding at the door. One grateful, one guilt-stricken, both united by the same fear for Naomi and the baby. When Marcus finally stepped inside to sit beside his wife, Nathaniel remained in the hallway a while longer, staring down at his phone, scrolling back through weeks of messages he was only now seeing for the first time. Walter found him there an hour later, standing rigid near the vending machines, jaw clenched so tight it looked painful. You should have told me sooner, Nathaniel said quietly, not looking up. All of it. Every message you sent. I tried, sir. More than once. Walter's voice was steady, but there was old frustration underneath it. Miss Sterling told me she'd pass along anything urgent, that she was handling the household communications during the wedding planning so you wouldn't be overwhelmed. I assumed my messages were reaching you and you simply hadn't had time to respond. I should have pushed harder. I'm sorry I didn't. Nathaniel finally looked up, something hollow in his expression. Don't apologize. You tried to warn me and she made sure it never landed. That's not on you. He rubbed a hand over his face, exhaustion catching up to the anger that had carried him through the last few hours. How long has this been happening, Walter? Really? Walter hesitated, weighing how much to say, before deciding the time for careful diplomacy had passed. Weeks at least. Small things at first. Sharp words, unreasonable demands, tasks given specifically when she knew Naomi was struggling physically. It got worse as the wedding got closer. I believe Miss Sterling saw Naomi's closeness with this family as some kind of threat to her own place in it, though I confess I never understood why. Naomi never wanted anything from this family beyond a fair wage and decent treatment. The words landed heavy because Nathaniel understood with sudden clarity exactly how right Walter was. He thought back over the past few months. Small comments Bianca had made about the staff being too comfortable, about wanting to modernize how the household operates, about how loyalty from employees who'd been there for years could sometimes make a new fiancée feel like an outsider in her own home. At the time, he'd brushed those comments off as simple insecurity, something to be patient with as she adjusted. Now he saw them as something else entirely. The early groundwork of a woman clearing out anyone who might stand between her and complete control of this house, this family, this version of a life she decided she was owed. Down the hall, a security guard from the estate arrived carrying a small hard drive, at Nathaniel's earlier request. The smart home system installed 2 years ago recorded footage from several exterior cameras, including one positioned near the side patio, mounted originally for insurance purposes after a break-in scare on a neighboring property. Nathaniel hadn't thought about that camera in months. He thought about it now. He sat alone in an empty consultation room and watched. The footage confirmed everything he already knew, and then it showed him more than he was prepared for. A second incident from 10 days earlier, grainy and silent but unmistakable, Bianca grabbing Naomi's wrist hard enough to make her flinch over some minor disagreement about linens, shoving a stack of boxes into her arms despite Naomi visibly protesting. Nathaniel watched himself walk right past that exact spot in the background of the same footage, close enough to have seen it if he'd simply turned his head, completely unaware, already halfway to a business call that had felt urgent at the time and now felt like nothing at all. The guilt of that realization sat in his chest like a stone. He hadn't caused this, but he'd been present for at least part of it without knowing, trusting that his home, his household, the people he loved, were safe simply because he loved them. He understood now that love wasn't the same as attention, and attention was the thing he'd let slip while planning a wedding to someone who had been quietly tearing his household apart the entire time. Bianca arrived at the hospital just after 7 that evening, her heels echoing down the tiled hallway before Nathaniel even saw her. She'd changed out of the clothes she'd been wearing that morning, her makeup freshly done, as if she'd taken the time to compose herself into someone entirely different from the woman who had swung a hockey stick at a pregnant employee hours earlier. "I came to apologize," she said, stopping a careful distance from him. "To Naomi and to you. I lost my temper, I know that, but you have to understand the pressure I've been under with this wedding," and she really wasn't listening when I asked her. "Don't." Nathaniel's voice was quiet, but it stopped her cold. "Don't finish that sentence. I watched the footage, Bianca. Tonight and from 10 days ago. I know exactly what's been happening in my own house, and I know exactly how hard you worked to keep me from finding out." Her composure cracked for just a moment, something calculating flashing behind her eyes before the wounded expression slid back into place. "Nathaniel, please, we can talk about this privately, we don't need to." "You're not going in that room," he said. "Not tonight. Go home, Bianca. We'll talk when I decide it's time to talk." She opened her mouth to argue, seemed to think better of it under the weight of his expression, and turned and walked back down the hallway the way she'd come, heels striking the tile a little less steady than before. By the time he returned to the hallway outside Naomi's room, his decision had crystallized into something unshakable. This couldn't be handled quietly, tucked away and smoothed over the way problems in families like his so often were. Word would spread regardless. Staff talked, hospitals had records, and Bianca herself would likely try to control the story before he could. If this was going to become public in some form no matter what he chose, then he intended to control exactly how the truth came out and exactly who heard it first. The engagement gala was still scheduled for 2 weeks away. Half of Savannah's business community had already RSVP'd. Bianca had spent months building that night into a showcase of everything she wanted people to believe about her, and about the life she was marrying into. Nathaniel decided, standing in that quiet hospital hallway with Naomi's soft voice drifting faintly through the door behind him, that the gala would still happen exactly as planned, just not the way Bianca was expecting. If you found out someone you trusted had been hiding the truth from you for weeks, how would you even begin deciding what to do next? 2 weeks later, the ballroom at the Bishop Estate glowed with candlelight exactly the way Bianca had always pictured it, except she had no idea how the night was actually going to end. Naomi wasn't there, of course. She was home resting on doctor's orders, 1 week away from her due date, her arm mostly healed, her blood pressure finally settling back into a safer range after days of careful monitoring. But she'd heard everything that happened that night secondhand, first from Walter's phone call late in the evening, and later in far more detail from Nathaniel himself. The gala unfolded exactly as planned for the first hour. String music drifted through the ballroom, waiters circulated with trays of champagne, and Savannah's business community mingled beneath the same crystal chandeliers Naomi had helped shine to perfection weeks earlier. Bianca moved through the crowd in a pale gold gown, glowing with a kind of confidence that came from believing she'd successfully buried an inconvenient problem. At exactly 9 o'clock, Nathaniel stepped up to the small stage set up near the string quartet, tapping a glass gently until the room quieted. Bianca made her way to his side immediately, beaming for the crowd, expecting the toast she'd been planning in her head for weeks. Thank you all for being here tonight, Nathaniel began, his voice carrying easily across the room. I want to say a few things, and I hope you'll indulge me, because they matter more to me than any toast I could have prepared. He talked first about his parents, about the values they'd raised him with, about a father who'd worked construction before he ever owned a company, who taught his son that the true measure of a person was how they treated the people who couldn't do anything for them in return. The room listened, charmed, assuming this was simply a heartfelt preamble to an engagement announcement. Then his tone shifted. A few weeks ago, I walked in on my fiancée assaulting a pregnant member of my household staff with a hockey stick, he said, and the room went utterly silent. A woman who has worked for this family for 6 years. A woman who was told by her doctor not to lift anything heavy, and who was struck anyway because she couldn't complete a task fast enough. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Bianca's face drained of color beside him, her mouth opening in stunned protest. Nathaniel, this isn't the place. It's exactly the place, he said, turning to look at her directly for the first time since he'd started speaking. You spent weeks making sure I never found out. You intercepted messages meant for me. You isolated a woman I consider family until she was too afraid to tell me the truth herself. Have the footage, Bianca. Have the messages. And I have decided that the people in this room, the same people you wanted to impress tonight more than anything else in the world, deserve to know exactly who you are before any of them congratulate you on anything. You're humiliating me in front of everyone I know, Bianca hissed, her carefully composed mask finally shattering completely. You did that yourself, Nathaniel said simply. He slid the ring box from his jacket pocket, the one he'd been carrying since he picked it up from the safe that afternoon, and set it on the small table beside the stage. The wedding is off. I'd like you to collect your things tonight. Security will help you if you need it. 2 security guards, waiting quietly near the side entrance at his earlier instruction, stepped forward. Bianca looked around the room, searching for even one sympathetic face among the guests who had gone from confused to stone-faced in the span of a few sentences, and found none. She left the ballroom the way she'd walked into that house 3 months earlier, certain of her own importance, except this time every set of eyes in the room watched her go, and none of them were impressed. Back at the estate that night, Walter heard the whole story unfold through a flurry of texts from staff who had worked the gala, and for the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to exhale fully. He thought about the messages he'd sent that had never reached Nathaniel, about the quiet worry he'd carried every single day watching Naomi push through exhaustion and pain because she was too afraid to ask for help. It wasn't justice exactly, not in any way that undid what had already happened, but it was something close to it, and after everything, close felt like enough for one night. He called Naomi before she'd even heard the news from Nathaniel directly, his voice thick with something between relief and pride, and told her simply, "It's over. You don't have to be afraid in that house anymore." Naomi sat with that phone call for a long time after it ended, resting her hand on her belly, feeling Grace shift lazily inside her, and let herself believe fully, for the first time in weeks, that the worst of it truly had passed. Naomi went into labor 4 days later, right on schedule, and delivered a healthy baby girl after a long but uncomplicated night. She and Marcus named her Grace, just as they'd planned, and when Naomi held her daughter for the first time, exhausted and overwhelmed and finally, fully safe, she cried harder than she had in the ballroom weeks earlier, except this time, every tear was relief. Nathaniel visited 2 days after Grace was born, standing awkwardly in the hospital doorway with an enormous bouquet that Marcus later joked cost more than their first car. He didn't stay long, but before he left, he sat down across from Naomi and told her something she hadn't expected. "I want to set up a trust for Grace's education," he said. "And Elijah's too, if that's all right with you and Marcus. It's not charity. It's what should have already been in place for a family that's given 6 years of loyalty to mine." He paused, something raw in his voice. "I should have been paying closer attention. I won't make that mistake again." He also offered Naomi a new position when she was ready to return, household manager, with a raise that made Marcus sit down hard on the edge of the hospital bed when he heard the number, along with a small guest house on the estate grounds that had sat empty for years, theirs to live in rent-free for as long as Naomi wanted the job. Naomi didn't cry easily, not after everything the past month had put her through, but she cried then, holding Grace against her chest, looking at Marcus's stunned, grateful face, understanding for the first time in weeks that the ground beneath her family's feet was finally, truly solid again. What Naomi learned that spring stayed with her long after the bruises faded, that kindness given freely, without expecting anything in return, has a way of finding its way back when you least expect it, and that speaking your truth, even when it terrifies you, is sometimes the very thing that saves you. She never went looking for revenge, never wanted Bianca publicly humiliated for its own sake. She only ever wanted to be treated like a human being. In the end, that was exactly what she got, and so much more than she ever thought to ask for. To everyone watching tonight, thank you for staying with Naomi's story all the way to the end. If her strength moved you even a little, remember that the way we treat the people who have the least power to fight back says everything about who we really are. If Naomi's story moved you the way it moved us while we made it, give this video a like. It genuinely helps stories like hers reach more people who need to hear them. If you're new here, consider subscribing because we share emotional, real-feeling stories just like this one every single week. We'd love to know, what part of Naomi's story hit you the hardest? Tell us in the comments below, we read every single one. And if you know someone who's ever felt unseen or undervalued for doing the right thing quietly, send this video their way. It might be exactly what they need today. Thank you for spending this time with us. We'll see you in the next story.